Business Latest is brought to you by Capco in just about everything.
On the next Riz Khan show, rock star and activist Yusuf Islam, formerly known as Cat Stevens, reveals the origins of his new song celebrating the popular uprisings in Egypt and beyond. Riz Khan, at this time on Al Jazeera.
The Golan Heights, one of the spoils of the 1967 war, home to 20,000 Israelis and source of 1/3 of all Israel's water. But what of the Syrians left behind? With families torn apart and all borders closed, they come to talk to their loved ones across the Shouting Valley. Across the Shouting Valley on Al Jazeera.
All the news, all the time. AlJazeera.net/English.
From local traders to international finance, it's commerce that makes the world go round. For global companies and developing markets, communication is the currency, and information is the most valuable commodity. Counting the cost at this time on Al Jazeera.
Personal blogs by professional journalists. blogs.aljazeera.net.
It's 13 GMT, the top of the hour. If you're just joining us, you're watching Al Jazeera's extended coverage of the protests taking place across the Middle East. I'm Shuli Ghosh. Let's remind you of the top stories now. Fast-moving developments in Libya. These are the latest developments. Tens of thousands of Libyans holding mass protests after Friday prayers. There have been demonstrations in the east, in Derna and Benghazi. Also reports of clashes in the capital, Tripoli. And there have been more resignations of Libyan diplomats. The country's ambassador to France and the UN agency UNESCO are said to have quit their posts. Now that comes amidst growing international pressure on Muammar Gaddafi's violent crackdown on protesters. The UN Security Council is holding an emergency meeting later on Friday. Speaking in the last hour, the UN Foreign Policy Chief condemned the violence in Libya. Foreigners continue to be evacuated from Libya. A US chartered ferry carrying over 300 people, many of them Americans, has now left Tripoli for Malta. Now, demonstrations against government corruption and poor living conditions are also taking place in Iraq. Some violence between protesters and riot police has broken out in Baghdad. At least 2 people have been killed in the northern city of Hawja. Egyptians too keeping up the pressure on the country's military leaders. Live pictures coming to you here from Cairo. Thousands turning out in Tahrir Square after Friday prayers. They want the caretaker cabinet to move faster to enact reforms, and they're calling for the Prime Minister to quit. And this is Yemen. Tens of thousands of pro-government activists have taken to the streets of the capital, Sana'a. It comes as a surge of pro- and anti-government rallies take place across the country. Well, earlier, Yemen's president ordered the formation of a committee to open talks with protesters who are demanding that he step down. Now, tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets of Libya after Friday prayers. The international community has ramped up pressure on the leader, Muammar Gaddafi, over his violent crackdown of anti-government protesters. Al Jazeera's Lawrence Lee has the latest.
More and more footage emerges of triumphalist scenes from Benghazi in the east of Libya, suggesting Gaddafi's forces have lost half their country. Pictures of crowds dwarf anything Libyan state television can provide of pro-Gaddafi support. Friday prayers in Benghazi have seen thousands and thousands on the streets. All the banners are for the benefit of the capital. We're with you, Tripoli. In the town of Derna as well, Friday prayers were followed by a sea of placards which barely need explaining. It all adds to the sense that Gaddafi and whatever's left of his support base are under more pressure than ever. Still, the fighting goes on in parts of the west. According to Gaddafi, these people are either members of Al-Qaeda or high on hallucinogenic drugs. Some of them are certainly in terrible pain. They're people from the town of AlJazeera who tried to fight Gaddafi's forces when they stormed the town. In his telephone address to AlJazeera on Libyan television, Gaddafi seemed to imply that they deserved it.
The demands come from bin Laden. You Azawiyah people are substituting the popular and Jamahiriya system with bin Laden. Bin Laden cells have been operating here for months. His operatives are provoking and brainwashing your children, inciting them to launch attacks. The enemy perpetrating the killings of our children, operating from mosques or elsewhere. Bin Laden and his operatives are providing your children with hallucination pills.
Gaddafi's apparently relaxed attitude to the violence, the allegations by Libyan witnesses, the images coming out of people tied up and executed are all the kind of thing that some in the outside world say need to be investigated as potential crimes against humanity. So, pressure from the east of Libya, pressure from outside the country, and pressure too from his own loyalists, who desert him now with regularity.
What happened and is happening are massacres and bloodshed never witnessed by the Libyan people. The logic of power and violence is being imposed instead of seeking democratic, free, and mutual dialogue. And because what is happening in Libya today is against the principles of truth and justice, which I believe in, I therefore confirm my resignation from the post of the chief prosecutor in Libya.
Other pictures are emerging which seem to undermine Gaddafi's claims of the prospects of civil war if he goes. Here in Tobruk, where protesters apparently overran the army, locals say national unity against Gaddafi is more important than tribal allegiance.
It's true we are tribes, but we are united. There are good relations here. We meet and cooperate. We're working together. We will not conspire or fight each other. When push comes to shove, we are united.
The people of Tripoli, meanwhile, got this from Libyan state TV, a sermon that wasn't overtly pro-Gaddafi, but which had this apparent warning from the Quran to the people of the uprising.
As the Prophet Messenger said, if you dislike your ruler or his behaviors, you should not raise your sword against him, but be patient, for those who disobey the rulers will die as infidels.
What this congregation or others like them in the capital make of it all in the hours and days to come may well be critical. Lawrence Lee, Al Jazeera.
Well, we've got correspondents throughout the region. Our correspondent Nazanin Mashiri is in Ras Ashdir on the Libyan-Tunisian border. Nazanin, first of all, you're not that far from AlJazeera, which has been the scene of violence. What are people saying to you as they're coming through the border?
We've been speaking to people on the ground in AlJazeera, also people who have made it to the border from AlJazeera. It's a pretty similar story. They say that the town is now in the hands of the people. They're out protesting in the central square. They have been doing so since Friday prayers. They say that they have 4 tanks and weaponry in their possession. Weaponry they were able to gain from military barracks near AlJazeera. Now, we understand there was fighting and clashes earlier, but things are peaceful now, but they are preparing themselves for more fighting. They are holding or trying to maintain defensive positions within the town where, however they can, preparing themselves to fight to the end. Now, we spoke to one man, a businessman called Hussein, who told us that he's not afraid. He's waiting, he says, to fight to die. He wants history to record Gaddafi as a Hitler. And what really angered them was that speech by Gaddafi where he called people who were protesting in AlJazeera drug addicts and connected to Al-Qaeda. That's what he was saying. And he says that actually persuaded more people to come out and protest. Now, we're also hearing about what's happening in other towns, in Zawaria, which is closer to us, about 50 kilometres away from where we are, closer to this border. We understand that town is also in the hands of the people. That's what people have been telling us who've been coming here. Police stations have been set on fire there. There's no police, no military. But interestingly, what happens when you come away from those towns toward this border is a heavy military and police presence. We saw a helicopter just about an hour ago, very close to us here, a Libyan helicopter, 15 kilometres away from where we are. There is an important checkpoint where people have told us they are stopped they are searched. All their SIM cards, all their footage, anything they have, any electronic equipment is taken off them, as well as money. But many foreigners, Chinese, Egyptians, Tunisians, are allowed to pass. Libyans, it's more difficult for them to get through. That's one of the reasons why we're seeing not many Libyans coming across this border.
OK, Nazanin, thank you very much indeed for that update. Well, thousands of Libyans have been flocking to the border with Egypt as well. Jamal El-Shel joins us from Saloum, which is just inside Egypt. Jamal, we're being told by the Egyptian authorities that over 38,000 Egyptians have crossed that border where you are. Presumably there's not many Libyans being able to get through. What's the situation?
Indeed, truly, they are in the tens of thousands in terms of the Egyptians who've passed through, and the Libyans who have come across are in their hundreds, maximum maybe just over 1,000 over the past 4 days or so. And the situation here is quieting down a bit, but I'm just going to step out of the camera and ask my cameraman to zoom in to this little crowd here behind me of a woman holding her baby, and if you can see 2 other women and their children right behind them. And that is the sense of a lot of the people that are coming here. You'll see in a bit in the shot a couple of volunteers from the Egyptian Red Crescent who come and go. It really is a situation almost like a refugee center essentially, but obviously these are Egyptians returning home from the violence, and they do have a place to go to. The Libyans who are crossing, on the other hand, don't. Unless you know a friend here, or unless you have a relative here, it is a lot more difficult to get here or even find a place to stay. And there is no United Nations Refugee Agency here. There is no refugee camp here for the people who do make it. And these are the lucky ones, it must be noted. There are tens of thousands on the other side, I'm told by the people who make it here, who weren't lucky. Either they're stuck in the violence, or they themselves in the early days of this violence were killed. So the situation was quiet here in the 5th day of mass exodus essentially from Libya. Still remains the same in terms of the stories we're hearing and in terms of the shape of people coming through here.
Well, just as regards the kind of experiences people are having, what are the Egyptian authorities doing about offering humanitarian